You're listening to the East Meets West Pakistani Professional Journeys podcast, released bi-weekly every Sunday at 5 p.m. on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple iTunes. Welcome to the East Meets West Pakistani Professional Journeys podcast. Today we have Wasiq Shaikh, who has completed his bachelor's in computer science from Ryerson. His experiences ranges from working from NextJ Systems, Spiders Incorporated, and a principal architect at Slalom Build. It's a pleasure having you on, Wasiq.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Awesome. So I guess we could get started in terms of your connection to Pakistan. Do you mind just sharing what information you would like to share for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Born and raised in Canada, in Toronto. My connection to Pakistan is obviously through my parents. My parents are born in Pakistan. My mom was born in Lahore, my dad from Karachi. They got married. And so eventually, my father came to Canada. And my brother and I were born here in Canada.
Nice. And in terms of your experiences, any good or bad memories that you had when you went back to Pakistan?
Yeah, so a lot of great experiences. When I was a kid, my mom obviously took us to Pakistan. I wouldn't say frequently. I'd say there's about 4 or 5 times that I went back to Pakistan. The second time was in 91. I believe at the time I was in grade 1 and I was about maybe 6, 7 years old. Had a blast. And in fact, I remember learning how to speak Urdu in Pakistan with my cousins, with my family. I was only speaking English, and it was only the last month or so where my brain, for some reason, it just started to pick up so much of the language, and I was able to fluently start speaking with my family members. It was quite interesting, a little bit uncomfortable. When I came back to Canada, I, for some reason, started to forget English. And my brain just couldn't handle the
translation.
The translation between the two. So I eventually became dual language on that part. That was really interesting and lots of great memories. I visited a place in Lahore called Gulshan Park. I remember that. There's a place called Joyland. It's an amusement park that I went to go see and had lots of fun there. The biggest and the most memorable trip I had in Pakistan was going to Patreta, Murray. And that's where we saw some beautiful scenery, and it was absolute heaven. I remember that as a kid. We had this trip on a cable car between the mountains and lots of good memories. My first experience when I was in Lahore, obviously they drive on the other side or the opposite side of how we drive in Canada. And that was quite interesting. Scary at first because, okay, if we're going to talk about driving, the biggest thing about driving there in Pakistan is no one really follows the rules. If there are any rules, they have their own rules. And it can be quite scary at times when you're like bumper to bumper and you're like really close to somebody. And there's no checking blind spots. You're just honking your horn and you're going to change your lane. And everyone who's in the way has to get out of the way. The driving there, they are incredibly skilled, but at the same time, very crazy. It is so tight. The clearances, there are no guardrails on the mountains. And you have these giant trucks and buses that are incredibly skilled at how they drive around these sort of tight corners, blind spots, and making room for 2 cars around the mountain. It was scary. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your story is relatable to myself as well, but learning Urdu, you get that accent, that's a mixture of the English. And like, how did you overcome that in terms of learning Urdu and it's not being afraid to be judged?
That's a good one because I'm still trying to overcome a lot of these things. I've been told my T's and my Ta's are not consistent, the masculine and feminine. That's lost on me. I don't know what's masculine, what's feminine. But the accent to speak in Urdu, coming from someone whose first language is English, I have to put in a bit of effort to ensure that I'm rolling my R's and that I'm loosening up the jaws and the lips and ensuring that it's flowing and not very sounding like I'm from Canada. I want to sound like I'm from Pakistan. And so trying to loosen up the language there. Yeah, it can be a little bit difficult, but I think I've gotten a rhythm at it. Interesting thing though, I don't know how to read or write, it's purely phonetic. And I've just learned it through my parents, learned it through my family in Pakistan. And yeah, that's the interesting part. Yeah, as a Canadian-born Pakistani.
Yeah, it's the same for me as well. It's only being able to speak Urdu, but then not being able to read and write. Did you move directly to Canada or was there like a stop in between?
No, I was born here. I was born and raised I was
Got you.
born and raised here in Toronto in the early 80s. My brother was born in St. John, New Brunswick. That's where my father first had his job. So I'll tell you the story. The story is that my father's uncle first came to Canada in the late 60s, 68, 69. Oh, wow. And so he had sponsored my father. My father is the second person to come to Canada in our family in 1972. He moved around a bit, came to Toronto, Montreal, went to St. John. That's where my brother was born, came back to Montreal. And then we eventually settled in Toronto. And that's when I was born in the early 80s. Here in Toronto, he studied mechanical engineering. He had a degree from Pakistan, but he had to come here, do an equivalency, and then worked his way through menial jobs, eventually becoming an engineering draftsman, designing and creating industrial steam cooking appliances. And he's been at that job for 30 years and just recently retired a couple of years ago. And so I was born and raised here in the West.
Got you. So in terms of getting raised here, like how was that experience overall?
So that was pretty interesting. I didn't really have a huge interest in culture up until I would say early 90s, mid 90s. And so that's when coming back from Pakistan, understanding where we're from, how we used to live. My mom is originally actually from Junyot. And so it's a very old country, it's a very old village. And just seeing how people live there, how they speak and how they live their lives, lifestyle, what they wear. I was never wearing a shalwar kameez. I started wearing shalwar kameez in my adolescence. So like when I was 10, 11, beyond. My parents always instilled in us a sense of keeping a close tie with our Pakistani culture, even though being born and raised in Canada, it's very easy to lose that. Mm-hmm. What I remember is as I'm growing up in my preteens and my teenage years with my brother, it's reflected in even the music that we would listen to. If you probably remember this, remixes. We would have Indian remixes or Pakistani remixes, old songs remixed to modern beats and to reggae or techno or house music. It's just taking old music that our parents used to listen to and then bringing it into our modern day style. Now my parents can also enjoy it because it used to be their songs, and now we can enjoy it because it's in the modern version. And so I think that's a perfect representation of how we grew up, which is a mixture of both the old culture and the new Western culture that we're in.
So as you were growing up, when was the time you actually got an interest in computer science? Like where was that? Was that like early age or was it like in high school?
Yeah, that's a great question. So interest in technology and electronics, that was at a very young age. My father, back in the early 80s, had the Atari. I forget the exact model number. I think it was like 8800 or something like that. And so we play very simple games, the Space Invaders and Pole Position. But interest in computer science was when I was begging my parents for a computer. This was like late 90s, maybe like 7 when I was in grade 7. We bought our first computer, the IBM Aptiva. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but it's like a big CRT black tower. And it was this massive, heavy thing. From then, when we got our first computer, that's when I really fell in love with computers. I was like, wow, how does this thing actually work? How do I make it do the things that I want to make it do? I remember doing all my assignments. Everyone was impressed that I was doing my assignments in Lotus or WordPerfect or whatever those old programs were. My love for computers started then.
Okay. When did you decide, okay, I want to pursue this in university?
That was absolutely, 100% in high school. I moved to Brampton in the last stages of my high school years at grade 11, grade 12, and OAC, if people remember what OAC is. I had a teacher in grade 12 and OAC. We learned BASIC, which is a basic programming language. It's actually called BASIC. And that's where I started to learn how to program and think programmatically, think logically, for loops, while loops, etc. In my OAC years, we learned Visual Basic, so that's generating graphical user interface and making things happen when you click stuff. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go into computer science, and eventually got into Toronto Metropolitan.
So how was that experience?
So back then, I was part of what was called the double cohort. So there was a little bit of a competition to get into university because there was this influx of application. I eventually got into Ryerson. I did get into Waterloo, but it was only for the math program. I wanted to go into computer science. I wanted to build stuff. So in university, that experience really was eye-opening to me because I had no idea how vast the computer science industry is. And it's just, there were so many different programming languages. There were operating systems that I had never heard of before. I learned languages like Smalltalk, which weren't really in mainstream and they were used yesteryears, but it helped me understand object-oriented programming. It helped me understand how to actually think about the real world and modeling it in objects and classes. It taught me how to think more than it taught me how to use technology for, let's say, building a program, etc. I think the thought process is what I learned more about in university.
And were you able during your university time, like in the summers, did you get part-time jobs in computer science, or
No,
was it completely out of field?
no. I was always of this mindset of I want to get out of school as soon as possible. I started taking extra courses during the summer. I started taking extra courses during the semesters so that I could have a fairly stress-free and easy fourth year. In my final year, I was doing my final year project. It was the capstone project. And that was pretty much the only thing that I was focused on. And it was so beneficial to me because when you're in university, you're incredibly stressed out. You would do anything to alleviate the stress in the future. And so for me, I think that's one of the regrets that I have is not doing co-op. And if I'm giving any advice to any students in university right now, is absolutely 100% do co-op. There's no reason to get out of school as quickly as possible.
So once you graduated, how was the job search in terms? I guess it was a different time where at least computer science graduates probably had more chances of getting a job compared to now, at least.
I think a lot of people have more chances of getting a job now, mostly because the startup culture was not really a thing when I was finding a job. The startup culture was really like the Silicon Valley, usually in the States, and those sort of big tech hubs. Toronto at the time, I don't believe was known that much as a tech hub. It was mostly like finance and business management, et cetera, but not as, over the years, it has grown significantly. The first job that I ever got was actually through a friend who had originally gotten the job but couldn't go, and then referred me to his employer and said, hey, I can't come to this. You can get my friend here, Wasiq. He's great. And I did one interview and they were like, okay, yes, you're good. I was working at North American Muslim Foundation. It's a charity organization based out of Markham. And it was a wonderful place. It was basically a school and a charity. I was working there as their system administrator for the summer, and building out their website, was every computer science student starts out doing, is just building websites and helping out with their computer networking and stuff. And so, yeah, that was a really fun job because I also got to meet so many amazing kids because it was a school. I got to teach them about computers. That was my first job.
Is there like a specific role or job or company that, from that point you kept on moving forward in your industry?
Yeah, it was a bit of a stepping stone. So moving from North American Muslim Foundation into my first corporate job, which was NextJ. They built CRM and healthcare software, but I was mostly on the platform side. There I learned how to think, how to program, how to actually structure my thoughts and my code. I had a great mentor, and he taught me how to do all of those things. That helped me eventually get to where I am right now, which is at Slalom Build, which is actually a funny thing because this is the end of my chapter at Slalom Build. I'm actually moving on to another opportunity, another adventure in about a month. Working there as a solution architect certainly has propelled me in my career. Being a consultant, being in front of clients, being able to communicate my ideas and my decisions and being able to back them up with data and understanding of design and implementation, planning, etc. That really helped me professionally. It helped me personally. It helped me figure out who I am and what my style of managing projects and managing people is. Slalom Build, I would say, is the greatest adventure that I've had in my career.
So how did you know, okay, this is where I want to focus on? What was your mindset in terms of deciding?
Yeah, it's a very typical story. Lots of kids who want to be going into computers, they always start off with, I want to make a game. They start off by playing computer games. My love for computer games started off with Need for Speed. I love cars. I love computer games. And so cars and computer games was just a match made in heaven for me. I would just play like racing games all the time. And so for me, I've always wanted to make a game. any kind of game, racing game, any kind. My dream was to work for Electronic Arts, as every kid wants to work with Electronic Arts. Maybe it's some other company now. But when I started doing my high school and university, I understood, oh, this is so much more than games. There's so many other things that I could do with this. I started to learn artificial intelligence way back then and how computers just generally think and how I can make it do whatever I want it to do. It's not just making a game. That's great. That's for entertainment. But there's so many other things that I could be doing. So I started focusing more on that. Networking, operating systems, threading, multi-concurrency, etc. And just that's where I started to veer away from the gaming and going into more general practitioner of software development.
Okay, so in terms of advice for a person who might be interested in computer science, how do you narrow down which area they might go for? Because it's just so big.
My advice to anyone who's coming into this kind of a career is know where your passions are. Okay. What do you really want to be doing? Like, remove yourself from the technology. The technology is always going to change and evolve and become better. But what is it that you want to do with it? A lot of people want to teach kids, and so they'll make software to help kids learn. Khan Academy is a great example of that. Do you want to help people, the elderly? Do you want to help society? Do you just want to make money and you can go into Bitcoin and create your own, sort of ecosystem? Like, there's lots of things that you can do with technology. I wouldn't focus too much on that. I would say focus on what your values are, what your passions are, and figure out then what technology you can use to help you propel in that area.
I know, at least I hear that within the industry, sometimes the hours can get in terms of the work hours can get quite intense. How do you try to make sure you don't burn out in terms of workload and just trying to keep up with family as well and friends and whatnot? Yeah. Is there a way you balance yourself out, or is it just work it through kind of?
That's a great question. This is probably the worst advice. Burn out at least once, because then you will know what your limits are. You will know the signs of burning out. So once you have burned out, it's good to always reflect back. Why did I burn out? What were the signs? How could I prevent it in the future? For me, I have burned out maybe once or twice. There was one time I was working on a really intense project. It was fun for me because I was really enjoying the project. I loved the technology. I loved the client. They were doing some amazing stuff in renewable energy, but it was just too intense for me. It was just too much work. And there was one point, it was my first anxiety attack, and I had no idea what was going on. Like many people, they're like, oh, I'm just sitting here watching TV. Why is my heart rate going so high? Why is it hard for me to breathe? Why am I feeling dizzy? What's going on? But just all of a sudden, this sort of pressure builds up. And you're like, oh, okay, this is my limit. This is where things are not going great, and I need to step back and figure out how to manage this. What I do then in that case is I'm very deliberate about where my time is being spent. I don't need to be everywhere. I don't need to be in every meeting. I don't need to solve every problem. I just need to trust people to do that for themselves. And when I can come in is to push them in the right direction and just let them do what they need to do. So when COVID hit, I deliberately in my calendar would take 1 hour from my lunch and say that I'm out of office. And if anyone were to book the meeting during that hour, I would say, I'm sorry, I'm not available. I also have a young son. I have a 10-year-old son. So when he comes home from school, I have to go and pick him up. And so I would block that out of my calendar as well. So I'm not available. If I can be, I'll be on my phone. And I will be very transparent on that and say, hey, I'm not going to be on camera. I'm not going to be in front of the computer. I can't share my screen. I'll just be on the phone and we can have a chat, or I can just listen in. Being very deliberate with your time is what my advice is.
Yeah, I think that advice is important, because when you get burnt or have issues, you feel like you just need to push through. And then once it happens, then you just say, okay, yeah, it's fine. I might do it again, but you don't reflect.
It's important also to know that it's not world ending. Like it's okay. Don't worry about it. But work is work. Work is going to be there tomorrow. Whether you live or die, your company is going to find someone else to replace you. So don't worry about work. Just be transparent. Just be open and honest about your time. And also, if you have great managers, which I try to be to my direct reports, is raise your hand and say, listen, this is too much for me. I need to step away for a little bit. let's figure out a way that we can reduce the workload here, or figure out how to manage this in a different way. And if you have great managers, they'll be very open and receptive to that, and they'll try to find a solution for you.
So I guess we briefly talked about this, but for advice for individuals, people who are either moving in from abroad and to Canada, or people graduating right now in this current time, do you have any general advice to like excel in like computer science or in general, like software related field?
In general, yes, I have some advice for folks who are coming to this country, want to have a stable life in Canada or even in the US. My advice is learn to communicate. Learn to communicate your ideas in a very clear and concise manner. I'm here to tell you, listen, you have your authentic self, but there's the authentic self in the workplace. There's your authentic self in front of your parents. There's the authentic self between you and your friends. You don't act the same way between you and your friends as you do in front of your work or your work people. In that regard, my 8 years in consulting, I've seen a lot of characters. The ones that have the most difficult time are the ones who do not know how to communicate their thoughts clearly. If your thoughts are right or wrong, that's a matter of opinion. That's a matter of whichever industry you're in or whichever problem you're trying to solve. But if you cannot be understood, that is a problem. My advice to someone who's coming to this country, and if they're thinking about coming to this country, learn to speak the language of business. Learn to speak clearly and enunciate. Speaking clearly evokes confidence. And once you have confidence, you end up getting respect. And when you have respect, you will see success. The way that I'm speaking right now, this is not how I always used to speak. This is my professional voice.
So I guess it really comes down to adapting to whatever scenario presents itself in terms of interviews or family settings or whatever.
I'll give you a great example of why this works. My uncle, my father's brother, he came to Canada just a few years after my father, and he settled in Montreal. He's a wholesaler, and so basically he goes to distributors and gets their product and then sells it to different stores or flea markets, etc. He learned how to speak French. Why did he learn how to speak French? It's because he needs to be successful in the environment that he's in. So not only does he know how to speak Urdu and Punjabi, he also learns how to speak English and French. If he refused to speak French, he would not be as successful. He would not be in business, and no one would want to speak to him. So you have to adapt to the environment that you're in. If anyone who is thinking about coming to Canada, I encourage you to understand and adapt and see what the social norms are here and be flexible in those social norms.
Do you have any advice for them as they, navigate their career?
Yeah, I've thought about this before because my son is growing up. He's going through school. And so I'm giving him advice, which I wish I followed. If I could give myself advice, is make as many friends as you can in university, make as many friends as you can in your workplace, because at the end of the day, success, honestly, and I've seen it work, is all about it's all about your network. It's all about the people that are willing to open those doors and pull you in and pull you into their circle and say, hey, come in. We're successful here. I know you. I know what you're capable of. If you're alone, if you're a nomad, if you're typically a loner, you're not going to get very far. So expand your network, make as many friends as you can. I unfortunately didn't do that. I didn't make a lot of friends. I made friends only through my work experience. It's actually funny because the next adventure that I'm going to was from a referral from a friend of mine.
Full circle.
Yeah, full circle. It was from a friend of mine. I didn't apply, and it was just like, here, take my resume if you want to give it to your, recruiters, and let's see what happens. And it worked out great. My other advice is have fun. Just have fun. I took my university years way too seriously. I was always a bookworm and just trying to get those good grades because that was all that was important to me. And I would also say just take time to have fun.
Awesome. It's very interesting, like your way of presenting and being able to speak the way you are, like the flow is really good. Developed that through your career, or what's
that was developed? Thankfully, I thank everyone who has complimented me on my communication skills. I learned to do this through my 8 years of consulting. I was lucky enough to have managers that I looked up to and would admire and simply mimic. Find the people in your life that you really admire and mimic. as much as you can. Just copy them. No one's going to get mad. And so I took all of the good things, all of the good attributes from all of these great managers that I had, and I would just copy what they would do and what they would say and how they would say things. I took from them. And honestly, it comes from honesty. It comes from the heart. And if you speak your thoughts and your opinions very clearly and confidently, you will go far, very far.
Awesome. How do you define success? So you could take your time with this response if you need to. You could go personally or professionally. How do you define it?
That's great. Yeah, because I've been a people manager for the last 5-6 years. And so I've given this advice to all of my direct reports. The way that I define professional and I guess a mixture of personal success, I define it only in 2 dimensions. It's very simple. The 2 dimensions are, am I learning something new? And that could be learning something new every day, learning something new on a project, learning something new at home, learning how to cook, learning how to play music or anything like that. And the second dimension is, am I having fun doing it? If you're not having fun learning something new, why are you learning something new? There is no point in learning something new. A lot of people say, oh, I should get a certification in some technology that they've already been working on. I'm like, why? For what reason do you need a certification? Just to prove to the world that you have a certification, or to prove to yourself that you have a certification? Are you going to have fun learning all of the things that you already know how to do? Is that fun for you to do the certification? Some people just want to do the certification just to have that piece of paper. Some people have fun learning. Some people have fun doing those certifications. They turn it into a game. So to them, I say, great. Yeah, it's a game to you. Go for it. You want to get the high score. You want to get all of these different certifications. Go for it. So learning something new and have fun while doing it.
Okay. I guess we can end off, as you live in the West, like how do you maintain that cultural tie to Pakistan? Is there like a process you have?
That's great. The way that I maintain that cultural tie is actually through my family. Okay. I am humble. I'm blessed to have such a large family here in Canada. I'd say it's probably 400 plus people. Maybe we're approaching 500. I don't know, but it's a fairly large, and we're all over the place. Montreal, all the way to London, mostly in the Toronto and GTA area. The majority of the folks here in Canada came from Pakistan. And so by having the family ties, being very close with my family, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, hearing their stories, hearing how they, even if it's the same stories over and over again, about how they came to Canada, what life was like back in Pakistan, how they didn't have certain luxuries that we have here, and how they're so used to these luxuries in Canada, and now they can't. There's some funny stories how some people can't even go back to Pakistan because they're so comfortable with the luxuries that they have in Canada. And so just being around family, being around those folks who have already experienced Pakistan, I can live vicariously through them and internalize their experiences so that I can carry that on and let my son know about my experiences early on in Canada.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. That was really insightful. You talked about various aspects from your experience in Pakistan starting off, and then experience working in Canada, and then general advice that you wanted to provide. So thank you for taking the time to be on.
I appreciate you having me on.